Welcome to today's broadcast of North Idaho College Public Forum. The crew is comprised of NIC television students, and your moderator is North Idaho College political scientist Tony Stewart.
It is my privilege to welcome to the program today Father David Jager, who is a Catholic priest from the Seattle Diocese. He's also director of the seminarians from that area. Father Jager has been well known and publicized recently for his opposition to nuclear submarines and has dealt with that in a legal case, and we'll be involved in that soon and discussing that. And Father Jager, it's a pleasure to have you on our program. We look forward to this interview.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
I'm very happy to welcome to the program as a panel member today Father Bill Wasmuth, who is a Catholic priest at St. Pius X Catholic Church in Coeur d'Alene. Father Bill is probably best known as the president of the Kootenai County Task Force on Human Relations, and since April of this year as the president of the Northwest Coalition Against Malicious Harassment, is known for his human rights activities. We're always happy to have him on the program and invite him to commence the questioning today.
Thank you, Tony. Dave, if you would please just kind of catch us up a little bit. Why are you involved in the issue in terms of the nuclear submarines? Where are they located? What's going on over there, and why are you concerned about it?
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm involved, Bill, in the first place, I guess, just out of my Catholic roots. I've been directly involved only since 1978, when I became aware of how much I was implicated in the arms race, and when I became aware of what a incredible symbol of the arms race and of what the arms race is all about we had in Puget Sound in the Trident submarine. Before 78, Trident was the name of a chewing gum to me. In 78, I realized what had been developed there for many, many years, and what was coming to fruition in the Trident submarine. So I'm there as as a Christian and as a Catholic, and deeply convinced that we simply can't participate in such destructiveness, that there isn't anything that would warrant our preparing or engaging in such destructiveness as is represented in the arms race and symbolized there in Puget Sound in the Trident submarine.
How many submarines are there? And how many missiles and all?
Well, there are eight or nine submarines that are based now at Bangor at the present time. There are another 8 or 9 that are going to be based at Kings Bay, Georgia. Each of the submarines carries 240 warheads on 20-some missiles. Each of the warheads is many times the firepower of what destroyed Hiroshima. Each submarine has 8 times the total firepower that was unleashed in the whole Second World War. That's one submarine.
Each submarine?
Each submarine. Each submarine. It's incredible destructive power that's in each submarine. And the submarines have all been commissioned now, and a number of them, at least over half of them, are on patrol continuously now with their weapons ready, targeted. All it takes is the order for them to be launched. 240 warheads apiece.
This program was taped in October, and there will be some developments, I'm sure, after the program, but you have been arrested for your, I guess we would describe it as civil disobedience, and I believe even been convicted as of taping this program. I guess I have a two-part question. First of all, how did the arrest come about, you and other people, and with what method are you using to try to bring this to the attention of the American people?
Mm-hmm. Well, I became directly involved in resisting Trident, and in that way trying to resist the whole arms race and the approach of making war in order to solve problems in 78. And I think I realized in 78 that I would have to do this kind of thing. But I took from 78 to 84 to talk about it, preach about it, give workshops on it, and to get more educated. Since 84, I've been arrested 5 different times. And the most recent one was what I was tried with 8 others for on September 28th and 29th in federal court. It was for this time, the other times were all for blocking trains, bringing the warheads or the parts of missiles to the base. This time we walked into the old main gate of the base and to a mock Polaris missile, and there were about 30 people in all on that day, and prayed inside the base. It was the 4th anniversary of the publication of the American Bishops' Peace Pastoral. It was also Holy Week, and it was the Feast of the Atonement in the Jewish tradition. And our purpose was to take our prayer and our witness right to the place where we feel that there is such tremendous destructiveness, not just in the physical weapons, but in the willingness and in the intention to be involved with them and to use them. And maybe most importantly, the unconscious willingness of so many people. I go back repeatedly to the Second World War and to Nazi Germany, and the scandal, I think, that so many Christians and the church institutionally allowed what went on there to go on without standing up and saying anything, because it was, of course, dangerous to do so. But they continued to teach, to preach, and catechism, sacraments, and in the meantime, the whole society was engaged in setting up the camps, setting up the means of killing the Jews, rounding them up, taking them there in trains. All kinds of people, just like you and me, just like the people I know, like my parents, like my sisters and brothers-in-law and nieces and nephews, were involved in this and not admitting what they were doing because it wasn't their brainchild, but they were participating. Their resources, their energy, and their effort. I feel that we have to call attention to the fact that the same kind of thing is going on now. We're all engaged in building up terrific destruction and in readiness to use it, and we're not admitting it. And so I guess going over there to the base like that is to try to interrupt my life in the first place, interrupt the lives of others, and say, we have to look at what we're doing here, and we have to make a decision. Is this right? Is it going to work in the first place? Or I guess in the second place, is it going to work? In the first place, is it right? Can we participate in it as human beings, as Christians? I don't believe so, and and I have to not only talk about it but do something about it to show that I don't want to participate in this, and to ask others to not participate as well.
The second part of my question was what kind of reaction you're getting from the community in which you live or around the Northwest to the actions that you and others have taken.
I'm sure that I can experience a growing awareness. In '78, the first time that I went to a demonstration at the Bangor base, to most people in the Northwest, Trident was the name of a chewing gum. Now everybody knows that it's there, and most everybody has some sense of what's involved there. I think more and more people are having to realize that it is our decision to go along with it that is creating it. So I think that there's a tremendous amount of awareness now. I think there's a good deal of controversy and conflict about it, which I think is a good sign. It means people are thinking, people are grappling with it. People are grappling with each other over it. I'd say that there is some progress being made in terms of people reconsidering. At the present time, of course, we're going hell-bent for election in the direction of the weapons. But everything starts, I think, with an idea, and with some people beginning to do something about it. And I think that there is something in motion. But currently, the best sign, I guess, that I can point to is that I'm tolerated. I'm an associate pastor in a parish, and people know what I'm involved in, and they at least tolerate it, which means they're thinking. And some, of course, support it, but almost everybody tolerates it.
Yeah. Father Bill?
No one would say that they're for war, even if they were, and I don't think very many people are for war. And I think the people that are builders of the nuclear weapons and the strategic planners don't ever really plan on using them. Their point would be, I think, consistently made that the only way to preserve peace is to be strong enough to have a deterrent effect. And so at the same time that you say that you feel that you cannot participate in the society that in any way builds these things without opposing it. There are also those who would take the opposite view, I'm sure, and say that they could only participate in a society that was strong enough to defend the peace, to keep the peace by that deterrent effect. So you're coming at the same issue of peace, I suppose, from two very, very opposite sides. One would say be strong enough to be able to deter, and the other one would say, your view would say that the very fact of that, having that strength is in itself wrong because it ruins the human spirit to have that kind of destructive power at our fingertips and that kind of an intent to kill if we were ever called upon to do it. Can you address that dichotomy a little bit, and how do you respond to the people that come after you and say we have to do this to stay out of war?
Well, a couple of points. First, Bill, I don't think that I can agree that people are not for war. I think that people are willing to engage in war in order to accomplish certain ends. We can call them peace, but it's really a maintenance of the status quo. I think that what we're doing in Nicaragua is an example of it's a limited kind of a war that we won't even admit is a war. But in order to accomplish our ends there, we are willing to use weapons to destroy property, to kill innocent people, and to support it. So there is there's a radical willingness in people to use violence and force in order to accomplish what they want. And in order to preserve something that they have. So, granted, I don't think anybody wants war in itself, but we're willing to use it and to put ourselves in a position to use it. And I guess we have been for centuries. The other point that I would make is when we talk about strength, real strength comes from the right ideas, from vision, and then from character. What I'm talking about is working for what is right, real justice, and the peace that comes from justice, and putting ourselves, our minds, hearts, our resources on the line for that kind of justice and that kind of peace, and that's the kind of strength that I think that we need. When we talk about peace through strength, that expression talks about peace through the ability to destroy, and through the willingness to destroy. And we have an ability to destroy right now and a willingness to destroy that's beyond the bounds of anything that could ever be justified, and that in itself, I think, continues to perpetuate instability and disorder. So what we really have to do is understand, what does real peace consist in, and begin to work for that, and be willing to give our lives for it. But not willing to kill or to destroy on the scale that modern warfare allows, and to destroy innocent people in the process, and to build a war machine which at the very time we're building the war machine, before we use the weapons, is sapping our society of brain power, of material resources, is shackling the economy to build this tremendous military machine, which I think we use to intimidate. And we're all for peace, but the real question is, are we willing to use war in order to accomplish what we want, and how much war? And it's a tremendous amount.
It's difficult to say you're for peace if you're willing to use war to get there, I suppose.
Yeah, and especially willing to use war, as we, I'm afraid, have shown ourselves willing to do. I mean, we refrain from all-out world war now because of concern for ourselves, but we engage in all kinds of destructiveness around the world, and we have numbers of times threatened to use the nuclear weapons, in smaller conflicts. That isn't always known, but we have a policy. We don't use those weapons just to defend ourselves. We use those weapons as bargaining chips in order to tell people, you go along with what we want, or we will use these. We have this country has never forsworn first use of nuclear weapons, even though Russia, the Soviet Union, has. We have not. We won't say that. They're in our arsenal, and we say that they might need to be used at some time in order to accomplish some end that we decide is worth it.
That's first strike?
Mm-hmm. That's first strike, yes. First strike, of course, is different from first use. You know, you could use weapons just in a small conflict to achieve something, but first strike refers to the ability to knock out the capacity for the other side to retaliate. So it's one massive strike that is done before they have a chance to retaliate. And you know, we have our weapons are being designed these days in order to work toward the day when we could conceivably do that. Not that we would, but that we could threaten then, again, and intimidate with the use or the threat of force, you know, to get what we think we want or what we think is right, without listening to, you know, what other people's needs are in other countries, other parts of the world.
I want to pursue a theological and philosophical subject and question. I'm very much fascinated by some of the writings over the years dealing with the whole issue of how does one go about trying to bring change in a society such as a democratic society. And of course one position is that one works within the system and one tries gradually to change law. And then there's the civil disobedience approach that you certainly have been involved in, and Martin Luther King made famous. And recently we had on this program, or had to count because I don't think it's aired yet, but Reverend Jose Williams, who's been arrested 124 times, and particularly during the Civil Rights Movement with Dr. King. How would you espouse and defend the position of civil disobedience, and how would you answer your critics who indicate that within a democracy you can work and convince within the policy-making process without engaging in civil disobedience, and also give you the opportunity to talk about the nonviolent approach to civil disobedience?
Okay, well, I guess I have to say in the first place, you know, I support civil disobedience because I believe that there are higher laws and lower laws, and sometimes lower laws get in the way of the pursuit of higher laws, which are more important and applicable in a given situation. And so in a sense, which you're trying to obey a higher law, and in that case, setting aside a lower law. In our case, you know, we make the case in the courts that what we're doing is legal, that there are international laws and even military laws which make our weapons themselves and our policies that surround those weapons about how we would use them illegal, and that the weapons themselves ought to be found illegal in the courts of this country. And that we have a responsibility, just as the officers of Hitler's army had a responsibility, even at their own risk, you know, to disobey their orders, because those orders were contrary to higher laws. You know, that we have a responsibility to call the attention of citizens and military people and civilian personnel at the base. We have a responsibility to call their attention to these laws. International law, constitutional law, and military law. And we made that case as best we could to the judge, but at the beginning of every trial, the government moves for the elimination of testimony and anything to do with international law or constitutional law or military law, and that the case be judged purely on the lower law, which prevents our going inside the base. So that's never considered in the courts. At least it hasn't been yet. But lawyers, attorneys will say that that's an arbitrary decision on the part of the judge. So we feel that there is actual positive law that we are engaged in fulfilling, and that, as a matter of fact, under different circumstances, judges themselves could be found guilty, you know, of dereliction of their responsibility in a different forum with a different kind of mentality, because the laws are on the books. If the laws were not on the books, you know, if we didn't have it in positive law, the basis of what we're doing, we would still have to do it, because there is a higher law. All law is aimed at the good ordering of society and the promotion of the common good and the protection of the rights of individuals. And so when you have a law that interferes with that in a serious way, then you have a responsibility in your conscience to resist that to resist that, whatever the cost. You know, the people who testified at the in the Nuremberg trials that they were following orders and that they would have been themselves arrested and tortured and put to death if they had not, were not acquitted because they should have disobeyed orders. It was what was said.
I guess I got 2 or 3 more points on law. One is that there's no mechanism in international law. In fact, some international law professors open up a lecture by saying there is no international law in the sense what they mean, of course, enforcement if it's in conflict with what a world power would like to do, the Soviet Union, United States, whatever, and that in that case that countries at this point have the power to enforce their own laws over international law. With that as a problem, and then I'll take it a step further, let's suppose that international law was taking the same position as domestic law, and you could not appeal to that. Am I reading into your comments that you contend there's a law that's higher than any of those
yes.
human-made laws?
There's a law that's higher than that, you know, and that's why what I do fundamentally, you know, as a Catholic and as a Catholic priest, and would have to do under any circumstances, I think. But on the other hand, with regard to international law, it is stated clearly in constitutional law that international law holds sway, and that it is a responsibility of the United States government and its officers in the various branches to comply with international law. There is not the means to enforce that because there isn't a court that is empowered and recognized that judges between nations. But the courts that are in existence and the world powers are responsible to comply with international law, and we have been the signers of those accords ourselves as a country. And you know, that I've become acquainted with because of my court cases and studying and listening to the attorney. That isn't my field of expertise by any means, but I've seen it pretty clearly that you know, we have a legal case for standing before our fellow citizens and our government and saying we are not in compliance with the law that binds us. None of that testimony is allowed in court. At least it hasn't been thus far, because the judges rule in favor of the prosecution's motion to eliminate it.
I'll just ask one more question, and back to Father Bill. I suppose you've heard this too from your attorneys or others who are interested in the case. If a case was to arrive before the tribunal of the U.S. Supreme Court, the High Court, and if they conclude that the Constitution of the United States, the Supremacy Clause, puts the Constitution above all law in this country, and then all treaties or federal laws made must be in agreement with that, such as state and state law too, or it's invalid. But let's put ourselves in the position of the 9 members of the court for a moment, and let's suppose the U.S. Supreme Court was willing to declare in your favor and that those submarines and so forth could be dismantled. Is it even realistic to even think the court would do that as long as the Soviet Union would have, this is back to part of what Father Bill was talking about, as long as our number one foe in international affairs, the Soviet Union, could a court even find itself in a position of ruling that way when the other country would maintain those if you didn't do it through the disarmament process of agreements? Well,
you know, I don't look to the courts ultimately, or the officers of government to make the big change. You know, I look to the citizens, you know, of our country and of the Soviet Union. I think that that law itself it comes about as an expression of the sense of humanity, and so I guess. My appeal, even though I end up in court and possibly in jail, likely in jail, the appeal is to the citizens. The appeal is to my parishioners in the first place, and to other believers and people of goodwill, because the change will come when we understand our global responsibilities, and when the people in the Soviet Union do. And there's a lot of signs, I think, that signs of recognition on both sides that what we're pursuing is going to be ultimately destructive. It's not going to work, and it's counterproductive to the kind of world order and well-being that we're trying to create for ourselves, and that other people want. So I think it's the people, individuals, and then individuals organized into groups and movements that are going to make the difference. And so, you know, what could happen in the Supreme Court, I don't know. I think the Supreme Court could recognize our right to do what we're doing without passing direct judgment. It'd be indirect, but without passing direct judgment on the policy and the weapons. But they could recognize the responsibility of citizens to, you know, to stand up for what is right.
Father Bill.
As we're taping this today, I think the date is being set for the summit meeting between Chairman Gorbachev and President Reagan. Do you see that proposed action as being that helpful? This kind of follows along the question you were just saying. Is that sort of mutually agreed disarmament step by step, is that in the right direction?
Sure, I think it's always helpful when we agree to eliminate any nuclear weapons, and I think it's always good for the leaders of these two world powers to meet. That's always a step in the right direction. At the same time, you know, I don't see it as coming anywhere near what is needed, because I think Star Wars is a perfect example of it. You know, we are still aiming to be in control and to be ahead, and we're not. In a sense, we're probably more retiring missiles and warheads that we don't feel that we need than really trying to get at the policy itself of trying to govern the world through force and threat of destruction. So it's certainly not enough, but on the other hand, it's a hopeful sign that at least they feel that they need to, even if it were only a posturing, if they feel they need to look like they're talking and getting together and limiting some weapons. You know, it's a good step. It's a good sign. Just not enough.
I'm so sorry to interrupt. We're out of time. I wish we could continue this conversation. And on behalf of Father Bill and our staff, we want to thank you for being with us today. And it's been most informative.
Thank you, Tony. It's been my pleasure.
Ladies and gentlemen, our guest has been Father David Jager, Catholic priest of the Seattle Diocese and also the director of the seminarians. In his work, we've been talking about the issue of nuclear submarines and his position on that. We hope you've enjoyed the program, and I would like to invite you to be with us again next week at this same time. Until then, please have a good week. I am Tony Stewart.
North Idaho College Public Forum can be seen at the same time each week over this station. This production was videotaped earlier by an NIC student crew for viewing at this more appropriate time.